There
Good evening, everyone. Our program is going to begin in just 2 minutes. If you please make your way to your seats. Our program is going to begin in just about 2 minutes, as soon as everyone takes their seats. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay. Trouble with cordless mics, you never know when they're working or when they're not working. Well, you eventually find out if they're working, as I have now. So anyway, thank you very much for being here this evening. My name is Wayne McDonald. I have the privilege of being the chairman of the campaign. I'm also a state representative from Londonderry and also former state party chairman of the Republican Party here in New Hampshire. 8 years ago, when I met Governor Christie, I was convinced in meeting him and talking to him and working for him then, and I had the privilege of being his chairman 8 years ago. I was convinced he was the right person to be president of the United States back then. In the 8 years since then, watching the disasters that have unfolded here in America, in the United States of America and around the world, I'm more convinced than ever that he is the right person to become the president of the United States and to lead us out of the problems that we're facing. No one is better equipped to lead. No one knows the issues better. No one is more determined, and no one would do a better job. And I'm very proud to support him, and I hope you agree by the end of this evening with me. And by the way, unlike his opponents, he actually answers your questions when you ask him a question. And so with that, ladies and gentlemen, I believe he is in the building, and I would like to introduce Governor Chris Christie and Mary Pat Christie.
All right. Thank you. Well, good evening, everybody. It's great to be back here in Bedford. Mary Pat and I are happy to be here. And yes, Mary Pat is here. As I've said, usually when I come to these things, if I walk in, I can always tell the look of disappointment as people look behind me if she's not here. So I let her lead in tonight so that we would end the mystery quickly. Thanks for being here, Mary Pat. Couple of things to start off with tonight, and then we'll do what we normally do, which is to spend most of the time getting to your questions, because that's the most important thing for me, is to hear what's on your mind and have me answer what you're thinking about. Donald Trump was here last week, and he gave a speech here that I felt just compelled to comment on. Look, immigration is a difficult issue in this country, and we have to fix our southern border. There's no doubt about that, and I'm the only candidate who has a plan beyond just saying, close the border, as Nikki Haley says, close the border and be strong. Okay, I'm for that. Or Ron DeSantis, who says, shoot them stone cold dead as they come across the border. Neither one of those things will fix a problem if you're president. We'll talk about the immigration plan later, but I will say this, that people who immigrate to this country legally, no matter where they come from legally, are not poisoning the blood of this country. They are the blood of this country. Every one of us came from someplace else, except for Native Americans. Everybody else came from someplace else. And yet he stands up, and what he's trying to do, because I've known him for a long time, 22 years, what he's trying to do is take our anger over the fact that the southern border has been handled incompetently both by him and by Joe Biden, and to take our anger and make it somehow supportive of him. Now, let's remember, this is the guy who said 8 years ago, because you were here, many of you, I'm sure, and I was here, that he was going to build a big, beautiful wall across the entire border of the United States and Mexico, and Mexico was going to pay for it, right? And here we are sitting here 8 years later, and he built 52 miles of wall in his 4 years, which means, just in case you don't want to do the math yourself, he only needs another 110 years as president at that pace to complete the entire wall. And Mexico hasn't paid the first peso. And he came up here to New Hampshire a couple months ago and said, well, how would anybody believe that I would get another country to pay for a wall that's in our country? And I'm like, I don't know, because you said it about 4,000 times in 2016 that we thought that you actually meant it. We have to fix these problems, but he's trying to get you to be distracted from his failure by blaming these people. And notice what he said. He said, immigrants from South America, Asia, and Africa, all people who look different than him. Didn't say Europe, did he? Didn't mention Europe. Look, as I said, I've known him for a long time. And remember that this is a guy who came here and campaigned in 2016. And, got the endorsement pretty early on. You got to see it up here, brother. Come on. There's an empty seat right here. Come on. Come on up. We don't need you standing if you don't need to. There's one right there. Good to see you. During early on in that campaign, you may remember, he got the endorsement of David Duke, the former head of the Ku Klux Klan. And it took him more than a day to announce that he was rejecting that endorsement. Think about that. Why did it take him that long? After that, I asked him that question. He says, why did it take you that long? He said to me, well, those people vote too. Think about the cynicism of that statement, and think about how you put that in the context of that speech he gave. This is not accidental. This is not a slip of the tongue. This is a dog whistle to people who are rightfully angry about illegal immigration at our southern border and trying to paint all immigrants with that brush. It's wrong. And when people ask me, why am I doing this? Why am I running? Beside the fact that I want to be president and I think I'm the best qualified person to be president, I'm fighting for the soul of our country. That language that he used last weekend is not our country. It is not who we are. It's not who we've ever been. And I don't want our country to be represented by someone who would speak that way, representing us every day. And I'll tell you this, he's not the only person that we should be disappointed in. Ron DeSantis was asked about that this weekend. Do you know what he said? It was a tactical error. Like as if he was following Waze on his car and he tactically made the wrong turn, right? A tactical error. What's that mean exactly? A tactical error. And Nikki Haley still hasn't answered. Still will not answer. I mean, how hard is this? I got called that night after it happened, and I said, it's awful language, it's completely unacceptable, and it's just another example of why he does not have the character or the fitness to be president of the United States. Is that really in dispute? That someone who would say stuff like that doesn't deserve to be the president? But apparently, if you're playing for 2028, or if you're playing to be his vice president, you want to make sure you don't tick him off too much or tick off some of the people who are considering voting for him. I don't think that's the way you run for president. I don't think that's the way you lead. You lead by setting an example. And sometimes setting an example is hard. Sometimes when you set an example, you'll make some people angry with you. But I don't think we want a president who's either worried about who he or she might offend, and we certainly don't want a president who is going to appeal to the very worst in our country, the very worst, and try to use it as a way to get himself back in power so he can engage in the vengeance tour. I think what you deserve are straight and honest answers. And you shouldn't, in my opinion, be helping the person who is trying to bring out the worst in us. The person who should be our president should be someone we can point to and say that he or she is someone we can emulate, so we can be proud represents our country. And we certainly shouldn't accept evasive answers because we're trying to be everything to everybody. So let's talk about that for a second too. Can't have one set of answers in Iowa and a different set of answers in New Hampshire. You know, they invented something called the internet. You guys can catch up with that pretty quick when you want to. And so, you know, just this past week on the issue of abortion, Governor Haley, in the same interview, said, I think this is something states can decide. And then later in the interview said, but I believe there's room for a federal law. Well, I don't know. Which one is it? See, because if you want the states to decide, which is my position, I don't want the federal government involved in this issue, not one bit. Because if they get involved in this issue, they're going to take your right to decide as a citizen of New Hampshire what the law in New Hampshire should be. They will override it. And if it turns out that we have Congress changing as much as it has, you're going to have abortion law in this country be like a seesaw, going up and down, control from whoever's in control, Washington, D.C. I don't want that. I want to be clear. I want to make all of you have the power in your hands. You vote here in New Hampshire as to what you want the law to be about, such a difficult, emotional, personal issue. You all decide. For New Hampshire. New Jersey decides for New Jersey. Oklahoma decides for Oklahoma. And if you don't like the law in that state and it's the most important issue to you, then you can move and go to some place where you like the law, or you can fight inside your own state to try to get the law changed. Much easier going to Concord to fight than it is going to Washington, D.C. But I'll be clear, I would not sign any federal ban of any length of time on abortion because the federal government doesn't belong in it. Now, I'm pro-life. That's what I believe personally. And I govern that way as the governor of New Jersey. But when you're president of the United States, you have to decide, should the federal government be involved in making these decisions for people? And if you watch this Congress in the House try to pick a speaker, it took them 3 weeks to figure that out. And how about in the Senate side where they held up 400 military promotions for men and women in our armed services who earned those promotions? They held them up for politics. You want those people deciding the issue of life and what women can do in their own states? I don't. But Nikki went to Iowa in front of a conservative audience, being questioned by the head of the evangelical community in Iowa. And she said, yeah, I could sign a 6-week ban. She comes here and she says, we have to have compassion and we should let people decide. But there's also room for a federal law. Well, what federal law? When you press her on it, you know what she says? Well, we'd never get 60 votes for any federal law anyway, so why bother talking about it? Look, we don't need a pundit to be president of the United States. We don't need a constitutional law professor who's going to explain to us how many votes you need to overcome a filibuster. Tell me what you would do if you were president. If you were president, tell me what you'd do. That's your responsibility. Your responsibility is not to tell me what you think Congress will do, unless you have a Ouija board. You can figure that out. You need to tell me what you would do. And in Iowa, she would sign a 6-week ban, and here in New Hampshire, she'd have compassion. She'd let people decide, but there is also room for federal law. Look, we're getting to game time now, guys. It's 5 weeks from tonight that you're all going to be voting. 5 weeks. We're going to have a couple of intervening moments here called Christmas and New Year's, right? So, we're all going to be rightfully occupied at the end of this week by welcoming, hopefully, our families and our loved ones to celebrate with us, and then bringing in a new year, being with our family and our friends, and I'm going to try to leave you alone as much as possible. But look, it's time to decide, and I've told all of you many times before, you're not going to agree with every one of my positions. I wouldn't expect you to, but you're going to know every one of them. And when you ask me on Tuesday in Bedford what my position is, you're going to hear it. And if you come tomorrow night to Portsmouth and you ask me the same question, you're going to get the same answer. So if it angers you in Bedford, it will anger you in Portsmouth. And if you love it in Bedford, you're going to love it in Portsmouth. And it's not going to change. And by the way, it won't change when I go to Washington, D.C. either. It will be my answer on what I will do. And in today's politics, boy, we really need that. We really need that. We don't need people saying one thing and doing another, and we've had enough of it. We certainly got that from Joe Biden too, haven't we? So the guy who's going to bring the country together, he was going to govern as a moderate, and he was going to bring the country together. And instead, what did he do? He got into office, he ran to the left, to the far left of his own party, raised spending to huge numbers, all kinds of new stuff that he's requiring of each and every one of us. New regulations, new laws, the government in every part of your life. He said he wouldn't do that. Now he's done it. So maybe it's time just to open your eyes and know what you're buying. And then have that person deliver that. The good and the bad. Stuff you agree with and the stuff you don't agree with. But I'll tell you this. I governed a state for 8 years that had 1 million more Democrats than Republicans. 1 million more Democrats than Republicans. And it is not easy to be a conservative Republican governor with a Democratic legislature and 1 million more Democrats than Republicans. But what people from New Jersey will tell you is, I worked with everybody. If you got elected, you have a right to have a part in the decision-making process. Mary Pat and I used to have dinner and lunch and breakfast with people from the state legislature that not only we didn't agree with, some of them we didn't even like. But guess what? The people in New Jersey elected them. And it was our job to make sure we made it work, and we did. And we don't have that spirit in Washington anymore. We haven't had a president really since President Bush in the beginning of his term who tried to work with the other side. And we need someone who's willing to do that because these problems are big. And we're going to talk about a bunch of them tonight. And I'll end with this and go to your questions. I will not stand by and let anyone make your decision for you. What do I mean by that? I'm not going to allow, opinion writers, editorial writers, reporters, pundits, political insiders to come up here and tell you who you're supposed to vote for. That's not the way it works in New Hampshire. You decide. You decide. And I was reminded of all the people who try to make predictions about all this stuff. 8 years ago, right now, I had just gotten the Manchester Union Leader endorsement. I just gotten the Boston Herald endorsement. And man, Mary Pat and I went home for Christmas thinking, woohoo, look at us. All right? Not that much time left. Here we go. We're rolling at the right time. Not so much. All right? There's a lot of time left. And you all have to make your decisions, and I want you to. Don't listen to any of this stuff and have it persuade you from all that crowd. You decide. You get to be here and talk to me directly. You know how many voters in this country would love to have the opportunity you have to be able to actually see us over and over and over and over again? It's great, isn't it? I mean, you got a shot. New Hampshire can change the course of history. Nothing is predetermined. Nothing is predestined. You get to decide. You're the first people who will actually participate in an election. What they have out in Iowa is a caucus. It's not an election. You're first in the nation to vote. And you are going to set the tone. And either you're going to accept the anger and the bitterness and the vindictiveness and the vengeance of the past and perpetuate it for another 4 years, or you're going to say, no, we've had enough and we want to change. We want a different tone. And that's what I'm going to bring. And that's what I brought to this campaign. Remember something. In the end, if you've decided that you don't want Donald Trump anymore, if you've made that decision in your mind, if you've gone through a process of elimination and decided, yeah, I can't deal with Trump anymore, I'm not doing it. Okay, that's step one. Step two is, but who? I want you to remember something. And then I'm going to questions. In the first debate in this campaign in Milwaukee in August, they asked us a simple question. Would you support a convicted felon for president of the United States? And Nikki raised her hand, and Ron raised his hand, and Vivek raised his hand. I'm not going to do blasphemy on the other people who are now no longer in the race. But let me just remind you, you're looking at the guy who wouldn't raise his hand. And I got booed by a whole bunch of the thousands of people who were in the arena that night because I wouldn't raise my hand. And I dug my heels in and I didn't move. And I haven't moved since. And I'm the only one in this campaign trying to beat Trump. The only one. All the rest of them are jockeying for second place or vice president or secretary of state or 2028. I'm the one who can beat him because I'm the only one who's trying to beat him. And if you want to make sure you don't have Donald Trump again, you got to end it here in New Hampshire. Because if you let it go beyond here, it's going to get much harder, much harder. So we're going to go to questions. Now, usually I just randomly start picking questioners, but today, when I was flying here from Newark to Manchester, I met a pilot in the airport who was not flying our plane to Manchester, but lives here and was riding on the plane up to Manchester. And I told him, now this is a guy who, by the way, flew 16 hours from Cape Town, South Africa to Washington, D.C., then drove himself up to New Jersey because they messed up his flight to Boston, and then got on a plane to come here to come home. And I said, now this guy, who knows what he sleeps? But I said to him, if you show up tonight, I'll give you the first question. And he said to me, I won't be in my uniform. You won't recognize me. I want you to show you another one of my extraordinary qualifications to be president of the United States, because he's not in front of me. He's behind me. I saw him sitting in the corner over there. And so I'm going to hand him my microphone and you can have the first question because you showed up.
If you remember, I also said that this is my wife and I had been gone for a week and I had to get permission because I've been gone for a week. But when I told her, not only we had been lifelong New Jersey residents, so we were here living there when you were governor, and we lived there our whole lives and moved here because we enjoyed it so much. 6 hours ago, when you said to me, "I'll give you the first question," I went home and I said to my wife, "What do I ask?" So I'm not fully prepared. I'll be very honest. But do you have a question, dear? So I'm going to pass the mic because I don't want to waste time. Honest to God, I don't. But I am thoroughly impressed with that, and I want you for president.
I was going to suggest to him that he could ask something like, why would you be such a great president? But he's having trouble with the question, but that's all right. We'll move on to somebody else. So, all right, I've fulfilled my obligation. And look it, when the guy's got wings and he's flying planes and you're on planes as much as I am, you keep your promises to those guys. So who wants to start? Yes, sir, right back there. And he's going to hand you a microphone right behind you.
Hi, thanks for coming. So generally, I think one thing we've seen in the last 4 or 8 years under President Biden and former President Trump is the exacerbation of the two-party system's polarization. I mean, one thing you have in common with the typical Trump supporter and the typical Biden supporter is that they think the other side is awful, that the world would end if they'd be elected. So how, as president, would you overcome this polarization we've really experienced in recent years and enable bipartisanship?
Look, it's the only way to do it is to actually talk to the other side. Some of the best political advice I've ever gotten in my life was from a friend of mine who was going to do an editorial board at the New York Times. And I was young. I was like 2003, I think. So it's 20 years ago. And I said to him, he was a member of the Bush administration. And I said to him, "You're going to the New York Times editorial board? Are you crazy?" And he said, No, Chris, I'm not crazy. He said, "It's a lot harder to hate up close." And I really think that part of what has led to the polarization that you're talking about, it's only part of it, but part of it is we're so detached from each other. We're on our phones all the time. We're texting. We're tweeting. We're Insta-ing. Some of us are TikToking. And it's easy to be nasty and angry, right? You're sitting there, you don't have to look the person in the eye. I read every once in a while some of the comments that are made towards me on the internet. I think, if you actually looked at me and met me, these people wouldn't have the guts to say a tenth of what they say there. I think the same principle applies to our politics. Look, I was mentioning in the open that I dealt with the Democratic legislature for 8 years, and it wasn't close. It was 25-15 in the Senate. It was 48-32 in the House. And it was big margins. And so to get something done, you have to create relationships with those folks. And I did. And it's hard work because you don't fundamentally agree on a lot of different things. But what you do is you start to get to know each other, get to know their families, get to know why they came to Trenton, in my instance, or Washington in the first place. What did they want to accomplish? What motivated them? And then say to them, I want to try to help you achieve some of that. And then as governor or president, to use the power and the authority of your office to try to help them succeed. I think hate is a word that's used much too much in our society right now. I don't hate anybody. There's some people I don't like, but I don't hate anybody. And I think that we've allowed those divisions to become what defines us. And I think only a president can fix that. Only a president can set that example. And the example, the way to set it is, you put it, that the other side is completely evil and having them get elected would be a complete and utter disaster. That's why I never say that this is the most important election of our lifetime, because it's not. It's really important. But you know why I know it's not the most important election of our lifetime? Because we're going to have another one in 4 years, and another one 4 years after that. And we've had all of them beforehand. We get the opportunity to change when we make a mistake. We get the opportunity to change course if we want to. Or to not if we think it's going well. What a president needs to do is to set the example, and character is the most important issue in this race. I was raised not to hate anybody. I was raised to think that everyone deserves respect who treats you with respect. And that even for those people who don't treat you with respect, that you shouldn't escalate the issue to make it worse. Just walk away and let them know, I'll come back as soon as you're going to act respectfully. And I learned this, as governor, that you got two choices you can make in government. Put touchdowns in the end zone for the people who elected you, or stand in the corner and hold your breath. And I didn't stand in the corner and hold my breath at all in 8 years in New Jersey, and I'm certainly not going to do that as president. And I think it's a lot harder if I take, one of my biggest opponents in the House or the Senate when I'm president and invite him to the White House for lunch or for dinner and sit across from him and start asking them what they want to accomplish. It's going to be a lot harder for them to hate me. A lot harder for them to use those things to divide our country. Some still will, because we elect some bad people sometimes. But in the end, I think the majority of the people that are there because they want to try to help the country. And they need a president who's going to help lead them in that direction. And there's no magic formula to that. It is work. It is spending time and doing the things that you need to do to let them not vilify you. It's not only just the one-on-one, it's what you say publicly too. You can't be in a private room with them and say, all these nice things, and then in public go out there and say they're worthless. That ends the relationship fairly quickly. But also, we live in a democracy, And the founders set it up to be an argument. Different branches of government, checks and balances. So they wanted us to have an argument, but they want us to argue to get to a result, not just to argue for the sake of arguing. And so, I had a great relationship with the guy who was the Senate president in my state for 8 years, a guy named Steve Sweeney, who was the head of the Iron Workers Union in New Jersey. So another shy and retiring guy like me. And we made a deal right in the beginning that we would try to get things done together. And I put touchdowns in the end zone because that was the code word we used with each other, the code phrase. If one of us was going off the rails a little bit, saying, no, banging on the table, no, I won't do this, the other would say, we're going to put touchdown in the end zone or aren't we? And it was our code to each other to get ourselves back on the rails. And it wasn't always perfect. I remember going to the bottom of my driveway one Sunday morning and picking up the biggest newspaper in the state. And the headline on the front page was Sweeney : I want to punch Christie in the head. That was a more down moment in our relationship. But, a couple of days later, we spoke to each other. We had it out and we were back on track. I'm going to act the same way as president. And I think that's the way to get us back to it. It's taken us a while to get here. I will not change it overnight, but I will start trying to change it as soon as I take my hand off the Bible from taking the oath on January 20th of 2025. And I'll give you my very best effort every day to do that. And I will set an example that you can be proud of if you vote for me. And that's the way I'll try to do it. Thanks.
Thank you. I am startled about how divided we are. And one of the factors that concerns me the most is religious domination, something that our founding fathers did not want. So do you believe that religion should play any part in our policies on any level?
No one religion should play a part in anything. But I have to tell you that I pray and that my religious beliefs help to guide the kind of person I am. But no particular religion or religious beliefs is our religion in this country. And the founders made that really clear right at the beginning. No establishment of a religion, no Church of England, right? They had lived it and understood that they wanted to have a country of multiple faiths, a country where people could worship God in the way they saw fit. And, everybody who worships has a right to speak, and they have a right to have their voices heard in our political debate. No one should be excluded from that, but everybody should be respected. That's why when Donald Trump said he was going to have a Muslim ban in this country, I said no, because I know from being appointed U.S. attorney in New Jersey, the most ethnically diverse state in the country, on September 10th, 2001, that what happened the next day was not motivated by a religion. It was motivated by awful, evil people who also happened to be Muslims. And if you look at the history of any religion, you're going to have people who used that religion to accumulate power, to demean others, and to control things. That's not what we want in this country. And so to me, I'm proud of the fact that I'm a Catholic, and we sent our children to Catholic school, and we believe in our faith, but it's our faith. And when I watch what's going on in this country right now, to Jewish folks, it's outrageous. The anti-Semitism that's being acted upon. I mean, I saw pictures from yesterday in Penn Station and Grand Central Station in New York City with Hamas protests where, everybody from the anonymous, a guy who, took out of his backpack an Israeli flag that he had and draped it around his shoulders to show solidarity with them, and he was being brutally abused, to even someone like Alec Baldwin, who probably every once in a while deserves to be screamed at, but he was there and they were demanding that he denounce Israel, and he wouldn't. And they were screaming and yelling and pushing and shoving him, and the police had to intervene to get him out of Grand Central Station. I mean, that type of intolerance in our country has to be unacceptable to everyone, no matter who you are, no matter what your faith is. And so I agree with you completely. There cannot be any religion that dominates what goes on in our country. Everyone's religion should be a religion that is freely practiced by anyone who wants to practice it, and that we should not be discriminating against anyone on the basis of their religion, and nor should any religion, whether it's, followed by a large number of people or not, become the dominant religion for the government. The government should be devoid of organized religion, but remembering that on our money, we say, "In God we trust." In the Pledge of Allegiance, we say, "One nation under God." I don't believe that America is here by accident. And so I think faith in God, if you have it, is an important part of guiding you morally. But it should be your guidance morally. My guidance shouldn't be yours. And that's the way I feel about it. But thank you for asking. All right. Yes, you. Let's go.
Thank you, Governor. Thank you so much for the front row seat. Greatly appreciated.
You've been to a lot of town halls, babe, so you start to get front row.
Thank you. So about an hour ago, the Colorado Supreme Court ruled that President Trump was ineligible from being president under the insurrection clause. I was just wondering if you would agree with this ruling. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Quinn. Well, this came out about, let's say we've been here about 20 minutes, so a half an hour ago. It's a 213-page opinion. It came out while I was in the car. I started to try to read it. Didn't get very far. But let me just say, so I can't comment on the opinion itself because I want to read it first. But what I will say is this. I do not believe Donald Trump should be prevented from being president of the United States by any court. I think he should be prevented from being president of the United States by the voters of this country. That's what I think. And I don't believe that it's good for our country if he's precluded from the ballot by a court. I think it's bad for the country if that happens. Now, the other reason I believe that is because, he will have had to incite insurrection, be a part of an insurrection for him to be excluded. There's been no trial of him on that. And while I have very strong feelings about that, as you know, I also have very strong feelings in the fact that people in this country deserve to have a trial before rights are taken away from them, and deserve to have a decision by a jury of their peers before rights are taken away from them. So I know it will be counterintuitive to a lot of people who listen to me about Donald Trump, but I hope it just goes to prove you, I don't hate him. I don't. I just think what he's done is horribly wrong, and that he doesn't deserve the right that we would give him as voters to lead us again. But as far as the court decision, I'm not going to dump on the court until I read it. And if I think it's not well reasoned, I am a recovering lawyer. I will read it and give you my opinion, Quinn, maybe tomorrow in Portsmouth. But I need time to read it first. But I think you need to know on the principle, I don't believe a court should exclude somebody from running for president without there being, a trial and evidence that's accepted by a jury that they did participate in an insurrection, and then they would be excluded under the 14th Amendment, the third section. So I think this is probably premature and jumping ahead of it. And I think it would cause a lot of anger in this country if people had the choice taken away from them. I would rather have them make the choice that he doesn't deserve it rather than having some court take it away from him. So I'll read it. I'll answer tomorrow. You can just watch on the live stream. If you can't make it to Portsmouth, don't worry. I'll answer it tomorrow for you. But I'll give it to you then afterwards. But that's the general principle. And I doubt that anything I read is going to change my mind on that. But I owe it to them to read it first. All right, let's go back here. Yes, sir.
Thanks for taking the question. As you so nicely put it earlier, if hate won't make us great, what would turn the zeitgeist of America to away from the dark side into a more positive course?
Well, how about first the government actually gets something done that needs to get done? I mean, look, I think part of the anger that people have in the country is that the government's not getting anything done that needs to get done to fix the problems we have. We've known we've had a border issue for 20 years. But here we are 20 years later, still with the same arguments over and over again, right? We know we've had a spending problem for 20 years. Remember, when George W. Bush got elected president, if you think back to that campaign, one of the biggest arguments in the campaign between he and Al Gore was, how were they going to spend the surplus? Remember? Well, Al Gore wanted a lockbox, remember? And Bush wanted to cut taxes, and they were arguing about a surplus. It seems like 200 years ago, not 20 years ago, given the way the spending went crazy after that. We're not getting that done. We know there are problems with Social Security and Medicare that are going to come in 10 years and cost people 25% of their monthly benefit if we don't fix it. But we've done nothing about it. So, that and a whole variety of other things. So first, how about getting something done? Second, have a president who is willing to speak to our aspirations and to how great we can be if we work together, rather than making us great by dividing us further and playing off that anger. I always felt in the 8 years that I was governor that I was just the luckiest guy in the world. Like, I got to be governor of the state where I was born and raised. I mean, my mother didn't live to see it, but she was the oldest daughter of a single mother, grew up in abject poverty, and never had a chance to go to school beyond high school, and worked hard her whole life. I mean, she wouldn't have believed it. And I always approached my job every day in a way that tried to, because she wasn't there, tried to honor that by being positive and aspirational and trying to be inspirational. We need a president who will do that. Third thing I'd say is you need a president who's willing to make a deal. Like, we've had presidents now, both Obama and Trump and now Biden, who are unwilling to make a deal. If it's not their way, it's the highway. And that's it. That's not the way this country was designed to be. And the American people don't expect that we're going to agree on everything, but they expect us to get something done. To do that, though, you have to be willing to have the guts to say, I'm going to compromise. Compromise is not a dirty word. But in today's politics, we've made it a dirty word. That somehow, if you compromise on anything, you're a rhino on the Republican side, right? I mean, one of my sons said to me this weekend, he's like, you're saying the same things now that you were saying like 10 years ago when you were a darling of the conservatives. And now all of a sudden, Trump's calling you a rhino every day. A rhino dog was what he called me this week. A rhino dog. I don't know what that really means exactly, but I'm sensing I'm off the VP list. If I'm a rhino dog, right? So, we need to stop that stuff. And compromise is not a dirty word. And I think that the way to change the zeitgeist, as you called it, is to show people, like I did in responding to his question, that you're willing to work with the other side. I'm not willing to roll over and play dead, hardly. But what I am willing to do is have a good argument and then figure out how close can I get them to my position. And if I don't think it does harm to the country, to strike a deal. Move the ball 20 yards down the field. That's not a failure. That's progress. And I think those three things would help a lot. And I think that people would get a lot less angry if they felt like we were doing that stuff. And they had a president who was, appealing to their better angels. I see your hat, and you served this country. And I suspect you didn't serve it as a Republican or a Democrat. You served it as an American. Maybe we need to go back to having a president who happens to be a Republican or a Democrat, but first is an American. And that's what we should get back to. He's coming around behind you.
Governor Christie, Thomas Sowell called you an articulate Republican. I agree.
What did he call me?
An articulate Republican.
Articulate Republican.
Yeah.
All right.
I wish someday I'll learn to speak as well as you do. So, having followed your campaign, I understand that you want three things. You don't want Donald Trump to be president. I agree. You don't want Joe Biden to be president. I agree with that too. And you want to be president.
I agree with that.
So, if going for all three significantly risks not getting anything at all, I think it might be wise to settle for 2 out of 3. I know you know where this is going, but please hear me out.
Sure.
And New Hampshire is unique in the primary process. I believe this is the best opportunity for anyone to convince the Republican voters that they are a realistic alternative to Donald Trump. So I also don't think that the perfect should be the enemy of the good. Given these circumstances, I think you should seriously consider, like not today, give it maybe until New Year's. And I'm sorry to be so blunt.
I'm from New Jersey. I can hack it.
You know, I used to drive to.
You are like the nicest person I've ever met.
Thank you.
So this is.
You know,
I know where you're headed. This is really not that bad.
I wasn't born here. I'm an immigrant, and something I really like about this country is that you can say things that are not popular and not feel unsafe. Anyways, so I think you should give it a little more time. And if you are not the front runner based on various metrics, I think you should seriously consider working to help whoever seems to has the best chance, because you have made the case why Donald Trump is not fit to be president, and I agree. But maybe you also don't want to split the non-Trump vote. If Vivek Ramaswamy dropped out, his supporters will probably don't know where they'll go.
Yeah,
but yours, nobody who likes you is going to vote for Trump. So I think you should seriously consider this.
Yeah, this is the why don't you get out of the race and support Nikki Haley thing, which is the flavor of the month at the moment, and I get that. Look, at this point, 8 years ago, I was second in the polls behind Donald Trump right now. And I didn't see, Jeb Bush or Marco Rubio or Ted Cruz or John Kasich or any of those guys going, well, we should get out and help Christie beat Trump. But I will also admit to you that Trump was seemingly much less a threat then than he is now. So you'd have to think about it differently. Here's my problem. Nobody left is against Trump but me. You think I've made the argument that's why Donald Trump shouldn't be the president. Well, thank you, because no one else has tried. And I'll be honest with you. If I were to drop out and support Nikki Haley, I have no confidence in the fact that she'll make the case against Trump. And in fact, she was asked twice in an interview yesterday to rule out being his vice president, twice. And she refused to answer. I've said I won't be his vice president. I don't think there's much of a risk of that, but I'm willing to say I wouldn't be. And remember, 8 years ago, I was on the short list. It was down to me and Pence to be his vice president. Oh my God, how lucky I am. Ron DeSantis has said he would not accept it. So I'm not going to go out there and support somebody who could turn around and enable him even more. When she raises her hand and says, I'll support him even if he's a convicted felon, she enables him. When she says he's the right president for the right time, she enables him. When she says, for some reason, chaos and drama follow him everywhere. That's like the arsonist saying, for some reason, burning buildings follow me everywhere. Chaos and drama follow him because he creates it. Here's what she's doing. I am not going to get out of this race and support someone who doesn't have the guts to tell the truth about Donald Trump. She's worked for him. She's seen him up close. She knows what he's like, and yet she is dancing around it. So you want me to get out for somebody. And by the way, Ron's the same way. And Vivek, for God's sake, is like, his wingman.
He is.
Right? Okay,
Yeah.
so that's who's left. That's who's left. So who do you want me to get out of the way for? I mean, that's the problem with the question. This is like some type of like political science class argument. Okay? This is the real thing, man. And I understand what you're saying. And if I believe there was someone out there who had shown 1 ounce of willingness to take on Donald Trump, and this is not saying, oh, he ran up a lot of debt. He did. And I criticize him for that. This is different. This is a fundamental character question. And if she's not going to be willing to at least rule out that she'd be his vice president, I'm not getting out of the way for somebody like that. And by the way, you know what I intend to do? I intend to beat them both on January 23rd. That's what I intend to do.
Good luck. And good luck. I hope you can make the right decisions at the right time. And
look,
we don't look back at it and think that.
Here's what I'd like you to do, okay? Because I get your point. But here's what I'd like you to do. I'd like you to go to Nikki Haley's town hall and ask her the same question. Ask her whether she's willing to get out of the way for somebody who actually wants to beat Donald Trump. Why? Because of a poll today? Because if that were the case, then Jeb and Marco and John and Ted should have all gotten out of the way. It's 8 years ago, because I was ahead on December 19th of them. And by the way, if polls were that accurate, Hillary Clinton would be in her second term. I mean, I know you think you've got it all figured out because you read a poll. I've been doing this for 14 years on the statewide and national level. I was on the polling call, the exit polling call on election night of 2016, when the exit pollsters said that Hillary Clinton was going to get 360 electoral votes and the Democrats were going to win both houses of Congress. That wasn't like a poll 5 weeks before an election. That was the poll of people walking out and telling these people who they voted for. They don't, and people lie. Let me fill you in. People lie to pollsters, and people change their minds. How about this? I saw a poll that I was getting beaten up over a couple of months ago in New Hampshire that said 60% of New Hampshire Republicans said they would never vote for me. Never. Then they did another poll the next month. It was down to 47% of New Hampshire voters said they would never vote for me. I guess it wasn't really never. Because for 20% of the never, they went, oh, okay, I might vote for him now. I mean, that's why making these decisions based on polls is silliness. And it diminishes our electoral process to like reading the daily racing form. It's not that. How about we decide this? Who do we want to be president? And go out and try to make that person the president. Not worry about who's ahead today and decide, well, I should just leave. Well, by the way, based on that, we should all leave. All of us. Because he's 20 points ahead of everybody, according to the polls. So might as well all get the hell out. It doesn't make any sense. And by the way, I will also use the very polls that you're being a slave to prove this to you. In the last New Hampshire poll, 15% of my voters said if I dropped out, they'd vote for Trump. Go make sense of that for a second. 50, well, how could there be anybody after everything I've said about Donald Trump for the last 7 months, and they go, I vote for him, right? And then I say, oh, I'm sorry, I'm out. And they go, oh, Trump's my guy. What? How you vote for me? And then go, but if he's not here, I'll vote for Trump. 15%, that should be 0. That should be an easy decision to make. But my point to you is, the way, like, you're doing the math, oh, well, if Christie dropped out, all of his voters would go to Haley. And then she would be within like 8 points of Trump. And wouldn't that be great? No, she still loses. And by the way, not all of my voters are going to her, because a lot of the people who are voting for me because I've had the guts to stand up to them, guts that she's been unwilling to show from day one of this campaign.
An issue that I think is kind of important that I haven't really heard discussed is cybersecurity. We have people from within the country and outside of it hacking, stealing people's money. The grid may be at risk. Other institutions, other businesses may be at risk. As president, what can you do about this? And especially, what can you do about the foreign bad actors?
Well, let me tell you, the grid is at risk. And the grid is at risk because we haven't modernized it. We haven't modernized it from an operational perspective. So forget anybody even trying to hack into it. Operationally, it's at risk because there are times it just goes down because we haven't improved the technology enough. Then you add into it, this is the newest form of warfare. It is the newest form of warfare, and it's going on every day. And so what we need to do is to make sure that we modernize our defenses. And we've done some of that already, but there's more that needs to be done. And it's never going to end. So we need to be okay with the fact that every time we put up a new defense, there's going to be some smart person in China or Russia or North Korea or Iran who are going to try to figure out their way around that defense. And we have to invest the money and the time and encourage the people who have this expertise inside our country to continue to do that. You have something you need to say. Of course, there are government bad actors, and then there are terrorist bad actors that are being sponsored by countries. Look, you know that every day China is, let's use them as an example. China is hacking in every day, both through their military and through civilian efforts that are sponsored and paid for by the Communist Party of China. Every day. And every day we're here playing defense. And by the way, you know what the other dirty secret is? We're doing it too. Okay? Because the best way to respond to a cyber attack is a counter cyber attack. Like, we don't want to launch a missile necessarily in response to a cyber attack. We want to show them we have the same capability too. So my point to you is that this is a new form of warfare. The thing that makes it different is that it has an even greater possibility of affecting everyday Americans. And you alluded to that about money being stolen and personal information being stolen that can compromise your ability to do anything in your life. I mean, I had my identity stolen along with a whole bunch of other public people. I'll never forget the night I was actually having dinner with Mitt Romney. No joke. And Mary Pat's calling me on my cell phone. She knows I'm in dinner with Mitt Romney. I'm like, what is she doing calling me? Like, I'm in dinner with Mitt. I don't want to be interrupted. She called like the 5th time. And I'm like, Mitt, there must be something going on. I got to take this call. So I stepped away from the table and she said to me, something crazy's going on here. Random people are calling our home phone and asking if it's really you and saying they've got your personal information and that it's out there. And so I called the state police because I was still governor at the time. And they say to me, oh yeah, your social security number, bank account numbers, all this stuff have been put on the internet. And wait, and so don't step on the punchline. 37 years, right? You would think she would know not to step on the punchline. So I come back to the table and I tell Romney, hey, you won't believe this. They stole my identity. There's my stuff out there all along. And then one of my troopers comes walking over to the table and he goes, by the way, all of Mr. Romney's information is out there also. So I go, Mitt, bad news. Because you're saying, oh, Chris, that's terrible. You know, and I like, it is, yes, but it's worse for you because you got a hell of a lot more money than I do, pal. So there's a lot more risk for you. Like, I've lived this. And I mean, I was the sitting governor. I had to go through three meetings in person with the Social Security Administration for them to give me a new Social Security number. Me. I'm like, look, I swear I'm not trying to get out of anything. You know, I'm sitting right here on TV every day. Like, so it's different type of warfare because it has the ability to impact individual Americans significantly every day, even more than traditional warfare does in the history of our country. So the next president has to understand how to continue to raise our defenses and our offensive capability to try to deter the bad actors from doing it because they'll think we can do it better than them and maybe they'd have more to lose than we will. But secondly, remember the other new thing that's on the horizon here and already here really and going to get bigger is artificial intelligence. And so it doesn't even necessarily have to be human beings anymore who are doing it themselves. It can be artificial intelligence at their direction, their initiative, at their funding that can do this as well. So we have a lot of challenges in this. And one of the best conversations I had in the last 4 months was with Henry Kissinger before he died. I was at his office talking to him about the threats in the world. And, you know, he was just getting ready to put out a book on artificial intelligence. Now, like, imagine, right? He was 100 years old. And he's like writing a new book on artificial intelligence. And I said to him, Dr. Kissinger, what made you do this? And in that, you know, absolutely recognizable voice of his, he took a sip of tea from his teacup and he looked at me and goes, because it scared the crap out of me. So it scared the crap out of him. So he decided I might as well look into this and write a book. So I think everybody is well aware of this. I think the problem that's being less addressed is the underlying problems of the grid. Not the tech problems, but the underlying reliability problems of the grid in this country. And we need to spend the infrastructure money that Congress appropriated, but Secretary Pete Buttigieg seems to be just taking a sweet old time and getting this money out there to help improve the reliability of the grid all over the country. But it's an important issue, and we're going to need to use AI to be our beneficiary here. And we're ahead of the rest of the world on artificial intelligence. We got to stay ahead of the rest of the world on that. So it's a really important issue, and I'm glad you brought it up. Yes, ma'am, right here.
Thank you. The other night, I was fortunate enough to ask you a question, and it's in regards to the AI. It was hoping that America could be the kind of place that I would like it to be, with somebody of your background and your integrity. There's a thing called integrity when no one's looking. So that being said, there's a theorem. In between 2 points, there's always another point. And so we have this viral action right now between every country fighting each other with the cyber actions. And I understand that our country's borders and our country's integrity is needing to have some type of cyber control. However, is there any thought that there would be some type of, and I'm just throwing out, international type of committee of understanding between countries where we just say, you know what, stop. You know, sometimes when things are going bad and you have to stop in your place and take a look at what we're doing. And so is there consideration for that? There's the other thing with Elon Musk right now, using the neurological link and whatever else. There's some big problems associated with that. You talk about hacking. Can you imagine having your brains hacked? So that being said, what are your thoughts on that? Thank you.
Sure. Well, look, I think in general terms, the answer to your question is yes, that, look, we've had other forms of warfare that we've outlawed, right? For the most part, chemical weapons have been outlawed since after World War I because we saw the awful effects that chemical weapons had during warfare. We have set up all types of rules that are mostly followed. You're always going to have some bad actors who don't follow it, but you get most of the world to agree on the way folks who are prisoners of war or hostages are to be treated. And we've had these agreements. So is it possible for us to have an agreement regarding the type of cyber warfare that we were just talking about and that you referred to in our last conversation? Absolutely, it's possible to do that. But you've got to get the major countries in the world first to be compliant with it. And, that's why our alliances around the world are so important. Donald Trump has spent an extraordinary amount of time telling us how worthless all of these friendships and alliances we have around the world. Everybody's taking advantage of us. The reason America is viewed around the world as the strongest, freest, richest country in the world is in large measure around the world because of those relationships. We don't have to buy our friends. The Chinese and the Russians have to buy their friends. The North Koreans can't even buy friends. Right? And the Iranians can't buy any friends right now either, except for terrorist groups. So part of what we need to do is to renew those relationships in a way that's meaningful. And then you can start to have these kind of productive conversations where if you get 60 or 70% of the world to say, here are the rules, and everyone's going to follow those rules, and we're going to enforce them on each other, that's something that is certainly worth consideration to doing, as we've done with other type of weapon systems. And look, cyber warfare is a weapon system, and artificial intelligence can be a weapon system as well going forward. And so I do think that's something that will have to be in the forefront of a new president. But before we can even get to that, we better repair the relationships we have around the world that have been damaged so much by what Donald Trump's done around the world and the things that he has said and done. It doesn't help when he's out there, saying Vladimir Putin is a great guy. Doesn't help when, he's out there using Vladimir Putin as a character witness for himself. So even Vladimir Putin thinks that Joe Biden stole the election. Well, that's because Putin tried to steal it in 2016, right? And he's an expert in that regard, but he's not a character expert. You need a president who knows who our friends are and who our enemies are. And he has the whole world upside down. In that speech he gave in this state last weekend, he talked about the greatness of Putin, the brilliance of President Xi of China. And you know why he said he was so brilliant? He said, because he rules 1.4 billion people with an iron fist. Really? Like that's what we're supposed to admire? I can't believe that in the live free or die state, you all would vote for a guy who thinks that the head of the Chinese Communist Party is a great guy because he dominates 1.4 billion people with an iron fist. That seems to me, I'm simple. It seems to me that's contrary to live free or die. And so, we've got to put those relationships back together and identify publicly, consistently, who the bad actors are. And then go to them and say, you want to continue to be bad actors? Or do you want to try to make sure that you're protected from the rest of the world ganging up on you? And I think those are the kind of conversations we need to have. But first, we got to have them with our friends to make sure they're all on the same page. And then we go in a unified way to try to control the bad actors. And it's not only about cyber, but it's also about Iran and its potential to have a nuclear weapon too, which, given what you see Hamas doing and Hezbollah threatening to do and the Houthis doing, all funded by the Iranians, we don't want them to have a nuclear weapon for sure. All right. Yes, sir, in the back.
So as you've kind of highlighted tonight, the kind of center point of your campaign has been your criticisms of the former president, and kind of pointing out his character and his rhetoric and whatnot. And I think a lot of us have seen that in him going back to 2015 or before. Despite that, you were kind of by his side through a lot of his presidency, and you were campaigning for him in 2020. And when you've been asked about this, you've kind of said it was his attempts to overturn the election in January 6th and stuff that kind of made you see him in a new light. But I guess my question is, what made you turn a blind eye to that rhetoric and character through those 4 years, and what made you think he was fit to serve another term in 2020?
Because of the choice. Like, I looked at in 2016, the choice between he and Hillary Clinton. I didn't want Hillary Clinton to be president of the United States. I thought she was fatally flawed, both from a policy perspective and a character perspective. And what I thought and hoped in 2016 was that if a large group of us who knew how to do things the right way surrounded Trump, that we could make him better. It was a hope. It made me understand the phrase and why it's a truism. Hope is not a strategy. And we all tried. A lot of good people. General Mattis, General Kelly, Mike Pompeo, Rex Tillerson, Steve Mnuchin, a whole bunch of really, really good people with great integrity tried to help him because we wanted the country to do well. And, what happened in 2020, from my perspective, was we're now dealing with a guy who I didn't think was competent to hold the office, mentally competent to hold the office, in Joe Biden. And I think we've seen over the course of the last 3 years that he's challenged by the pressures and the time commitments of this job every day. But what broke it for me is what you said. It wasn't even January 6th. January 6th just renewed it even more. It was election night. When he came out at 2:30 in the morning and said the election had been stolen, what I knew, he couldn't possibly know if that were true or not, and that every indication we had was that it wasn't. That when the President of the United States stands behind the seal of the presidency in the East Room of the White House and convinces tens of millions of Americans that the election was stolen, and they believe him because they say, well, he's president. He must know something we don't know. He didn't. And even there was just a new interview that came out this week where the guy who he hired to investigate the supposed election voting machine problems said there were 15 theories and he disproved all of them. And he told Trump that. That was the sense I had on election night. And I was on TV that night on ABC. And I turned to George Stephanopoulos when he was about halfway through the speech. And I said, come to me right after the speech is over. And he said, why? And I said, I won't disappoint you. Just come to me. And I slammed him for it and said I could not be supportive of somebody who would do that. And as soon as we went to commercial, my phone rang and it was Eric Trump. We're all angry with you. Why are you attacking my father? I said, because what he just did is destructive to the country and I will not stand by and let it happen without speaking out. And the last thing I'll tell you was what I did was a mistake. I thought I could make him better. I turned out to be wrong. And it wasn't the first mistake I made and it won't be the last one I make. But I'm the one who's willing to stand up now and admit that. You don't hear anybody else admitting it. And for God's sake, Kevin McCarthy is like campaigning for a cabinet position and says he supports him after he knifed him in the back and let him get kicked out as speaker. Like, I don't understand these people. How many more things have to happen? So you go like, oh, okay, well, that's enough now. So I admit that the judgment I made about him being able to be better turned out to be wrong. But, beyond that, what I can do is say, I learn from every mistake I made, or at least I try to, and try to make myself better. And I think you have to judge somebody based upon what they've done since then. So in the 4 years, almost 4 years since then, 3 years, I've been the most outspoken Republican laying out these things because I think it needs to be said. And I'm going to continue to do that. And I'm not going to bow to anybody who tries to rationalize or justify what is really, really awful behavior. And you have to make a judgment as a voter, whether that's good enough or not. I'll leave it to you. I don't know what the answer is. I hope I know what the answer is, but I don't know what the answer is. So that's part of what this campaign is all about too. All right, in the back. Kyle, why don't you get a microphone so that the cameras can hear you too, because the reporters will yell at me later.
Good evening, Governor. Kyle Kadish from Wyndham. The past few decades, we've seen tremendous growth with the administrative state in this country. Looks like the Supreme Court will have the opportunity to opine on that growth. How, as president, could you reduce the bureaucracy?
Well, I would do it the same way I did it in New Jersey. There were 10,000 fewer state employees when I left than when I got there. And I didn't do it by layoffs. I did it by, some areas that I just didn't think were necessary, that people got terminated. But more than that, as people retired as they do at a government service every year by the tens of thousands. I didn't replace them. And I think we have to continue to reduce the influence of those folks. And whatever the Supreme Court does could be very helpful in giving the president more tools to be able to do that. But I would just continue to reduce the administrative state if I don't have those new tools from the Supreme Court by just saying, people retire, we're not replacing them. We're not replacing them. And get this thing back under control. That's not only a control issue for the president, it's also a spending issue, because every one of those employees is expensive. And we just can't afford that anymore. With a $1.8 trillion deficit this year and 33 trillion in debt overall, we can't afford to be doing that stuff anymore. And, you know, making sure that those folks are in line with what I want to do, that will be a battle. It was in New Jersey. I had a couple of folks in New Jersey who got caught by me saying, we were here before he got here, we'll be here after he leaves. And there's a lot of that. But lessening the amount of regulation that the executive branch can do as well, and a president can do that, and I will, also gives them less to do and less authority. So I think you can do it in a couple of different ways. That's what I would do. But I would not do what Vivek says, which is fire 75% of all federal employees on the first day. Like, how will that work with the air traffic control system? Not very well, right? Good to have an expert witness here. I mean, you know, like, come on, like, this is TV tough guy talk. This is like, I'm firing 75% of them on day one. Sure you are, exactly. I can't wait to see. When people come over the border with a backpack, I'm going to shoot them stone cold dead because they have a backpack. Okay, I guess. Can't wait till you instruct our National Guards men and women to indiscriminately murder people coming over the border. Got a feeling there'll be a discussion about that. This is TV tough guy talk, and part of that is I'm going to give you practical answers. And then I'll actually do it because it's practical and can be done, as opposed to saying I'm going to build a wall across the entire border and Mexico's going to pay for it, and then only build 52 miles of it. I saw him in the speech in New Hampshire. He said, we built a lot of that wall, and we're going to build even more next time. He's getting careful now. That's him being careful. And we are paying at the border because he didn't do what he said he was going to do. We're paying today for it in a big way. So all these things, I digress just to tell you that I try to make promises very carefully, because the promises that I made in New Jersey were hard to accomplish, and they're going to be even harder to accomplish in Washington. So you better make them carefully, lest you disappoint people in a way that will make them feel even less confident in government, if that's possible at the moment. All right, we're going to go over to the red vests and fleece. And I'm going to let Catherine come over and give the microphone. For some reason, my wife gets bothered by this. So she can't, she can't help herself, right?
Why?
Like, so here's what, like, she's pointing to me. Catherine, give the microphone. Like, I'm working here.
I know.
Can you help me out?
You're working the crowd.
So what do you got? What do you have for me tonight?
Okay, the Live Free and Die state is comprised of mostly older population who is on Medicare. And because of that, because we're older, we tend to take more drugs. And some of these drugs are very expensive. I have a friend who has blood cancer. $1,000 a month is her copay. That's her copay. That's not the cost of the drug. So my question to you is, do you have any ideas on how we can reduce the cost of these drugs without having to go to Canada, like Ron DeSantis does, by the way?
Right, yeah.
I don't understand it. But
That's
anyways,
right.
He goes to Canada and brings them down and sells them
Right.
here. Isn't there a way that we can negotiate with the American companies that
Yeah.
develop these drugs to lower these drug prices? I know President Biden has done the insulin, which is so helpful to people, but what about other drugs?
Well, look, I think that you put your finger on a huge problem, because one of the great things about the pharmaceutical industry we have in this country is that they have developed extraordinary treatments that now prevent people from having to be hospitalized often and keep people alive, and even a better quality of life than they might otherwise have. But it doesn't matter if you can't afford to get them. So how do we balance that? How do we balance continuing to have an industry that can invest what they need to invest in research and development to come up with these things, but then also have people be able to afford it? I think there's two areas that I would focus on. The first are these pharmacy benefit managers. They're called PBMs. They are essentially, as you probably know, the middleman between the pharmaceutical companies and your local pharmacy. And what they do is, on most of these drugs you're talking about, especially the newer ones, the pharmaceutical companies are giving anywhere from 50 to 75% rebates on the list price of those drugs. And that money's supposed to go to you. That discount's supposed to go to you. So what happens is the pharmacy benefit managers in between take upwards of 2/3 of those discounts as their fee for managing the distribution of the pharmaceuticals from the pharmaceutical company to your local pharmacy. It is the scam of a lifetime. And no one talks about it because people don't really know about these folks, right? Because it's easy. The easy thing to do is say, Pfizer sucks. Like, okay, they're awful. Shearing, Bristol Myers Squibb, they're all horrible people. And they're making too much money, which also can be true. But the bulk of this money is being taken up by these middlemen. I would eliminate them. There is no need to have these people in between. And the reason you should know what a big scam it is you know who owns most of the PBMs now? The insurance companies. Oh, yeah. So they're telling you what they'll reimburse you for, setting the copay, and then they're getting the skim, as we would say in New Jersey. They're taking the skim. So they're making it on both ends. They're making it from your premium as a Medicare, if you have Medicare Advantage, all the rest of it, they're getting the premiums. And then when the pharmaceutical companies say, here's the rebate we're willing to give, they take 2/3 of that. And if we got rid of them, we would lower prices immediately, significantly and noticeably for you. Right, because they don't have this. We're not paying those middlemen when we bring it down to us. So that's why it's different. We've got these middlemen owned by the insurance companies who are making a fortune. The second thing, which is of a lesser amount of money, but which just annoys me, and I suspect annoys you, do we need any more pharmaceutical commercials? Right? Like, do I need any more commercials about drugs that I should be taking that I really don't know a damn thing about? But all the people in the commercials look really happy, really healthy. They're usually outside and they're exercising and they're with their families and they're throwing frisbees and swimming in lakes. And these are great Americans who are really healthy because they take fill in the blank, right? And then they say to you, but remember, this could kill you, blind you, make you deaf, and kill your family. So please get your doctor's advice before you take it, right? Like, I've had enough. And they spend billions and billions of dollars on that every year. How about just letting our doctors and healthcare providers decide what drugs we need? And if you want to go and tell them why this particular drug is so great, good. Go spend money doing that. Don't tell me. I went to law school because I didn't understand any of this stuff. If I understood medicine, I would have become a doctor. I didn't. I don't understand science or math. So they should be getting that money and putting that money in reducing prices rather than spending it on telling us what drugs we should buy, which we can't buy. We have to go to a doctor and say, hey, I was watching this commercial and is this good for me? And they're like, you don't even have that disease. What are you talking about? They do all this. So I'm saying, go do the rep thing. They're doing both because they think that if we put pressure on our doctors and say, I saw the happy people swimming in the lake. Well, I want to be that person. Give me that drug. That will make them write more prescriptions. And they must be right to some extent about it because they keep spending the money, right? And they wouldn't be spending it if they weren't getting some return on it.
RSV drug. Right. And I'm going, why? What's it for? It's for respiratory. I don't have respiratory, so I'm not getting it.
Well, that's live free or die, right? You get to say, like, I'm not, my doctor says I should get the RSV vaccination. I choose not to. Okay. Right. So I didn't get it either. Right. So everybody gets to make their choice of that stuff. But the price issue is driven by what they spend, how much it costs them to develop the drug, what they spend on advertising, and what they spend on their personnel, right? Those are the basic three pillars of running a company like that. Well, I don't want them cutting back on what they're doing in research and development. I want them to do that. But I don't need them to be advertising to me anymore. I've had enough. And when and I've spoken to leaders of the pharmaceutical industry because New Jersey is the leading state for pharmaceutical companies in the country. So I've met all of them. And I say to them all the time, stop doing this. Like they said, why do people hate us? Well, that's why, because the prices are too high and you're advertising like crazy and people think there's something up, and they're right. So those are two things that I would do right away. We can get them out of, and the president can get them out of the Medicare system, which would be a huge help. And then we'd need legislation to get rid of it for the broader public. But with the Medicare system, we can do that through executive action. We can't do it for the broader public except with a bill from Congress. And wait till you see how much they're going to lobby on that one to make sure that doesn't happen. But look, at the end of the day, it is not improving the health care you get. It's making it less affordable, and we need to stop it. All right. Yes, ma'am, right up here. I'm going to violate my wife's rule.
What about term limits and age? I mean, you got a lot of, half of them are asleep in those chairs. They're like 80, 90 years old, and they don't do change.
I agree. Okay, so I'll give you my opinion, and then I'll tell you what I think is possible. My opinion is that they should all have term limits. I had term limits as governor. I could do 2 4-year terms. That was it. And you know what? At the end of the 8 years, it was time to go, right? Like if I didn't accomplish what I needed to accomplish in 8 years as governor, 4 years wouldn't have made it. 4 more years wouldn't have made it any better. You know, and they get sick of you after a while. Everybody does, right? Like the legislature gets sick of you, the press gets sick of you, the public gets sick of you. Like we're listening to him for 8 years. Can you imagine? They're listening to me for 8 years. They had enough. I had a member of our state legislature who, when I got there, had been there for 40 years. He finally retired, is retiring right at the end of this year after 50 years in the state legislature. And I used to give him a hard time all the time because I didn't like him that much either. And I would say to him, like at the 30-year mark, you hadn't gotten everything you needed to get. Like you hadn't accomplished everything you wanted to accomplish. Like you're not indispensable. They think they're indispensable, and they love the title. So they should be termed. I think it should be 6 terms in the House. That's 12 years, and 2 terms in the Senate. That's 12 years. 12 years in the legislature, enough. And I think that's what it should be. Now, the problem with this is, and I'll get to the age thing in a minute. The problem with it is they've got to pass it. Of course, they're happy to pass it for the governor or the president. Thrilled to do that because they figure, what are the chances of me ever becoming governor or president, right? But they won't pass it for themselves. And so I don't want to sit here and say to you, I'm in favor of term limits and I'm going to get it done. Well, except here's the problem. If you're doing it with Congress, you got to have a constitutional amendment that's got to get passed in all the states, 3/4 of the states, and it's going to be very hard to do, or a constitutional convention, God forbid. We do not want to reopen the entire Constitution right now. I got a real concern about how that would go, you know. I got to believe there was somebody who would say, lifetime tenure for presidents. You know, I think there'd be one guy at least who would do that. So I think it's going to be very, very hard to accomplish, but I would advocate for it and continue to press for it. But I want to be honest with you and say, I don't know that we could get it done. On the age issue, this is really interesting because these age things move over time. I'll give you an example. In our Constitution in New Jersey, Supreme Court justices and any judge has to retire at 70. Now, when they passed this in 1947, 70 was really old, right? It was really old. Like they figured if that poor SOB can make it into work at 70, it's time for him to go, right? 70 today, is not like that anymore. And so we have this real argument going on in New Jersey about whether we should amend the Constitution to increase the age that judges can serve. Because a lot of them at 70 are sharp and really productive and could contribute a lot still. So I worry a bit about an age limitation that's just arbitrary based upon life expectancy today, right? So life expectancy today is 81 for men, 83 for women. It's the average life expectancy. So what do we do? Where do we set it? You'd be glad at 70. Kick them all out at 70. Well, geez, that would give her to Trump and Biden, wouldn't it? I'm for it. Look, I just am nervous about doing something like that. And again, so I'm giving you my philosophical point on it. I'm concerned about setting some hard and fast age because everybody ages differently and everybody has different capabilities at different ages. And there are some people, who can go really well. I mean, look, I look at my dad. My dad's 90. He still drives and drives well. I've even tested it and been in the car with him, not feeling in danger. He exercises every day. He is still totally with it. I am sure he's watching tonight on the live stream, and he's got a 74-year-old girlfriend. I mean, good God, if that's not hope, I don't know what is, right? So, like, everybody ages a bit differently. But again, the same problem would be they'd have to set the age limits. Well, that's right. But, they don't leave because they love the title. And they love the title. For some of them, it's money. Some of it's influence and power. Some of it's just a title. They like to be called senator. They like to be called congressman, right? Yeah, look, believe me, neither one of them would do anything for me, but that's what they like. And so I want to be honest with you. I agree with you absolutely on term limits. And I'm sure we could come to some kind of number we'd agree on. I think 70 is probably too low in where we are now. Maybe it's 75. We could come to an agreement on that, but they won't. 72 and a half? Deal. But they won't. They won't agree. They won't do it because they're protecting themselves and their futures. And it's one of the weaknesses of our system. But it is the reality of it. And so I don't want to sit here today and say I'm definitely going to get it done because it's going to be very hard to convince them of that. Oh, yeah. Well, hold on for a second now. All right, now you've already had a question before, right? Okay. I don't think she has. She has? You had one too? Oh, that's right. You did. You both had them. She had a really good one. Yeah, all right. Well, this is really hard, right? All right. I'm supposed to only do 2 more questions, but here's what I'll do. I'm not kidding. No, you don't have to do rock, paper, scissors. Don't worry about it. I'm going to give you both a question, okay? But don't make it a long question because then we're going to give 2 other people a chance for questions and then we'll go home, all right? So we're going to start with you because I am still a guy who believes in ladies first, okay?
Good, we get a president with manners for once. So, did you forget my name?
I do.
Okay, I expected that. You've done way too many of these to remember my name.
So remind me.
Okay.
You need some water?
No, I'm good. My name is Hannah.
Hannah.
Okay. So, when we were at Ron DeSantis' town hall, he said that everyone should learn their civics. For once, I took his advice. And I made my dad, well, I can't do the computer thing, but my dad made me these pins so that every time I see, I really.
You got it.
Okay.
That better?
Thanks. Yeah. Okay, there we go. So my dad made me these pins so that I could quiz people if they know what the stars and stripes were for. And then, of course, I had to tell people to go vote.
Right.
So it says stars, and then it says hashtag go vote Hannah NH. It was some people refer it as they kind of think it means hashtag go vote for Hannah NH. No, I'm not 35.
Right,
Get it.
Right. So you just want people to vote?
Yes.
All right.
Finally, somebody understands it.
There we go.
So this is for you.
Thank you.
Please wear it on the debate stage. It would be great.
It's gonna be interesting. Okay.
Okay. But my question is, so for Super Tuesday, I know you probably aren't considering it, but if you did consider it,
Yep.
who would you choose to back for Super Tuesday?
Me.
If let's
I'm not
say
there,
you weren't running
right?
and you had no idea that this could even happen,
Okay.
who would you vote for?
What an enormous mistake that was. An enormous, enormous mistake. And I'm not holding against you that you went to the DeSantis town hall. I'm sure it wasn't all that interesting, but you did your bit. You did your bit. I'm glad. All right, look, I'm not going to make that choice because I got to see what people do between now and then if I'm not in the race. Like a campaign matters and what people say matter. And people can add new things, subtract things that they're saying that would have a really important impact on my judgment. And so right now I'm voting for me. Although I don't live here in New Hampshire, so I can't vote for me until June in New Jersey. So I hope I'm still in the race by then. And I expect I will be. But, you know, I think the process you're going through would be the same process I would have to go through. I'd have to listen to all of them and what they're saying as the race got smaller and smaller if I weren't in it. And then I'd decide who I was going to vote for it. But then I'd also have to decide, do I want to tell everybody who I'm voting for? I don't have to, right? You don't have to tell me if you were voting. If you do vote, though, you're going to jail. So don't do that, okay? But you got to also decide, do you feel strongly enough about it that you want to tell everybody? And I don't know what the answer to that'll be. So Hannah will have to wait and see. Hopefully I won't have to make that decision. Hopefully I'll be voting for me. All right, Bob. Great question. Pressure's on you now.
So I was wondering if there should be a constitutional amendment to make sure that someone without prior political experience doesn't become president, at least at a level of a local representative. So, like, because you, Nikki, and Ron are definitely more qualified than Mr. Trump and Vic. So, do you think that there should be a constitutional amendment on that, just to make sure that we have people with prior political experience? We don't have like an outsider like Trump, like trying to recreate the system and like destroy everything.
Well, I agree with that emotion in the second half of the question for sure. Look, I wouldn't, and here's why. Because if we required prior political experience, even for president, we wouldn't have had Dwight Eisenhower. We wouldn't have had Ulysses S. Grant, right? We have had some, well, you know, I know you maybe have some different opinions about Grant, but I'm going to give you I'm going to give you the big book on Grant, which is about 900 pages. We'll get you to read that, and I think you might think better of Grant than you do at the moment. But look, I think that I don't think we should do that. I think we have the ability to prevent people who don't have relevant experience becoming president. It's called the vote. And we shouldn't vote for people who we don't believe have the requisite experience and character to do these jobs. This is not playtime. And given what's going on in the world right now, we need someone who knows what they're doing, because the world is in trouble and it's complicated and it's difficult. And, you know, running a few golf courses doesn't prepare you to decide what to do with war and peace. Doesn't prepare you to do what you need to do to work with a Congress to try to get things done. So I wouldn't make it a constitutional amendment that you have to have prior political experience, because I know plenty of people with prior political experience who have no business being president either, right? So I think the way we need to do this is we need to discipline it with our vote and not vote for people anymore just because they're a reality TV star. I think that would be a problem. But thank you guys for coming and listening. You're great, both of you. All right, I can do two more. Right there.
Hi. Could you talk more about how you would handle the crisis at our southern border and how you would help immigrants who are coming, who would do jobs, who want to work, and who are coming for good reasons.
Yep.
Yes.
Absolutely. Look, I'm glad you brought it up. I alluded to it in the opening and was hoping someone would ask, and I'm glad I picked you. Okay, so I would do 5 things. First, on day 1, I would sign an executive order that sends National Guard to the border. Our Customs and Border Patrol officers are overwhelmed by what's going on. Just to make sure you understand the numbers, they are having 200,000 illegal encounters a month for the last 11 months. They are outnumbered, overwhelmed. We need to even up the score there a little bit. And National Guard should be sent down there to do that. And that's what the National Guard is for, is protecting things inside the country. Don't use the Army, Ron. Don't have the Army invade Mexico. No, we really don't need a war with Mexico at the moment in that way. So that's first thing. Second thing, I would hire 10,000 new Customs and Border Patrol officers. But that's going to take a year to 15 months to get done by the time you recruit them, train them, and deploy them. So what I would do is do that over the first 15 months. And every time I send another wave of them down, same number of National Guards people come home so that we could have that requisite number. Third, we would absolutely have to expand our capacity to detain people at the border. Right now, we're having 200,000 illegal entry attempts a month. We have 38,000 detention beds. The math doesn't work. I'd double them and get it to 80,000 so that we can detain people appropriately, safely, while we're deciding their asylum claims, which lead to point number 4, which is right now, if you come to this country claiming political asylum, it takes 4 years to get a hearing. 4 years. And so what happens? You can't hold somebody for 4 years. So you release them into the country and say, hey, in 4 years, come back here to El Paso and you're going to have your hearing, to see whether we kick you out of the country or not. There are very few people stupid enough to actually come back if they're risking getting kicked out. So they stay in the country illegally. That's a problem. So what will we do about that problem? Triple the number of immigration judges. If you triple the number of immigration judges, you can take that from 4 years to under a year. And you can detain them for under a year, give them their hearing, keep them there at the border. If their asylum gets approved, they come into the country. If it doesn't, they get sent back. And fifth, we need to fix the immigration system in the way you're talking about. We have 6 million open jobs in this country right now. 6 million in this economy. What that tells me is that those are 6 million jobs that Americans either can't do or don't want to do. We've had this many times in our history. And what have we done? We have ramped up legal immigration for people who have the skills and abilities to do the jobs that are open. So for instance, my great-grandfather came here in 1901 because he was a stonemason in Sicily, and they were building New York City. And they needed masons over here, and a lot of them. So, when he got his ticket to come over here based on merit, he had the skills, they're going to bring him over. My great-grandmother was actually 9 months pregnant when the tickets came for the two of them to come. So he said to her, you go over, I'll go over, you stay here. And then when the baby's born, then you can come over together. My great-grandmother was a very smart woman. She's like, there's no chance I'm letting you go to America by yourself, dude. I'm on the boat. I'm going. And as a result, my grandfather was born in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. She gave birth to my grandfather. And he used to tell me this story, that his proudest day of his life was the day he didn't remember. He got here at 4 days old, and at Ellis Island, they made him an American citizen. And he said it was the proudest moment of his life because he was so proud to be an American. The people who are demonizing legal immigration in this country and immigrants, no matter where they come from, are wrong. And we would not have been able to build the country that we sit in right now without them. And so I would go to merit-based immigration and let people who have those skills and abilities move to the front of the line. And I would also require every employer to use E-Verify so they know whether the person they're hiring has legal status or they don't. Because some people don't want to break the law and wind up doing it unwittingly. And some people want to take advantage of folks who are here legally. And we don't want either thing to happen. But to get those two things, we're going to have to give the Democrats something. Those are things that Republicans generally want and Democrats are not in favor of. To get that, we're going to have to give them something. Maybe it's on Dreamers. Maybe it's on Path to Citizenship. I don't know what it's going to be. But what I know is for 20 years, we've said no to all of their things. They've said no to all of ours. And so we sit here today with this huge problem. You need a president who's willing to go in there and get it done and put your political popularity on the line to get it done, because there will be people, no matter what compromise you strike, who will be angry with you for what you did or didn't do. And you got to be willing as president to put up with that. And, look, we didn't talk about the budget tonight yet, but I mean, when I became governor of New Jersey, I had an $11 billion deficit on a $29 billion budget. And I eliminated 832 programs in my first year. And we balanced the budget without raising taxes. But my popularity went from 55 to 38 because every one of those programs had a constituency. I couldn't worry about that. I had to do what I needed to do. We had to balance the budget. And I didn't want to raise taxes on a state that is so expensive already that we would make it really unaffordable for people. But if you keep your word to people in general, they're going to reward you. And 3 years later, when I was up for re-election, I got 61% of the vote in a blue state. So we need to be willing to sacrifice short-term political popularity for getting something done. And if once you become president of the United States, you're not willing to do that, then in my view, you have no business taking the job in the first place. Because really, what the hell are you worried about? That you only get 4 years instead of 8? Like, people used to argue that to me as governor, and I'd say, I don't care. I'm already getting the portrait. Right? Once you get elected once, you get it. They hang it up. Mine's hanging right now in the governor's office in Trenton. I'm up there. I'll be there forever. And all you're really arguing over after that is the little brass plaque, whether it says 4 years or 8 years. And I'm not willing to sell my soul for an additional 4 years. I didn't do it as governor of New Jersey. I sure as heck wouldn't do it as president of the United States. So those are the 5 things we need to do. I think they're all accomplished, doable, accomplishable, and not pie in the sky stuff that can get done. And we should get it done. And if we don't, then what's happening at the border is going to continue. And that's a national security threat. As president of the United States, I'm not going to permit that. So I got to do whatever I need to do to get that done to protect the safety and security of the American people. So that's what I would do. All right. Last question. Who's coming around behind you?
Well, first off, I just want to say I admire you and I respect you, your leadership and your campaign and everything. So I just want to say thank you for running.
Appreciate that.
My question is, what is your message and strategy, media strategy, to inspire Americans of all backgrounds, or especially young people, to come together and be part of something bigger than themselves and support you?
Look, I think the only way to really do that is to lead by example. You can't buy people off, right? So Joe Biden, in my opinion, is doing an awful thing by saying he's just going to forgive student loan debt. That's just pandering to younger people, just try to buy their vote. I don't think that inspires anybody. And maybe it inspires them for one vote, but it doesn't inspire them to do what you just said. And I think the way to do that is to let them know, first off, like I did a college campus tour up here when I was here 2 weeks ago. Went to 5 different college campuses as a Republican. Now, people thought I was nuts, but I will tell you, I got great reception at those campuses. Part of the way to do it is to engage with people who are not engaged, is to let them know that their vote matters. And the best way you can let someone know their vote matters is by asking for it in person, showing up and listening to them, listening to what their concerns are. I called on a guy, I forget which school I was at. He had a MAGA hat on and a t-shirt with Trump's mugshot on it. And he had a totally non-Trump related question about teaching social studies in school, and he wants to be a school teacher. But afterwards, he came up to me and he said, I have to thank you. He goes, with this outfit on, I never thought in a million years you were going to call on me. And I said to him, like, I'm not afraid to answer your questions. And I want to hear what you have to say, whether you got a MAGA hat on or you don't. And I think that that's one of the ways you inspire people, is by going to where they are and engaging them and letting them know that someone who either aspires to leadership or is in leadership wants to hear their opinion. And so that's why when I was governor, I did over 150 of these town hall meetings when I was governor. All the time I went through and did them because it allowed me to hear what real people were concerned about. Not just what I'd read or see or my staff would tell me, but real folks. I would continue to do that as president. And I think the other thing is you have to show people that leadership and engaging in public life is a worthwhile endeavor. It is a noble calling. And you can't do that by yelling and screaming at them. You can't do that by giving them, like, look, Trump sent out a social media post at 2:03 a.m. on Thanksgiving morning, saying, I'm thankful for all the people I hate, and then listed all the people he hates. Like, that's not going to inspire any other person to go, hey, look at that. I'd love to be in politics. I'd love to serve in government for a period of time. I think you have to show them once again by your actions and your words that it is a worthwhile endeavor. It is a noble calling, and that you should spend some part of your life doing something that's bigger than your own self-interest. It doesn't have to be elected office. It could be any other type of service. And I think your question is broad enough to include that. It could be anything. It could be volunteer service for things. It could be military service. It could be civilian service to the government in some ways, or to non-governmental organizations, charities, others. But the president has to let people know that that's something that's valued and honored and desired, and that will respect you for doing it. Whether I agree with the thing you do or I don't, the fact that you're willing to take some moments away from just your own self-interest to try to make the country, your community, the world a better place should be honored. And you can only do that by your example and the words you use, but you've got the biggest megaphone in the world when you're president of the United States. And that's why when I see all these folks who are making excuses for what Trump said here last weekend, words matter. They matter. Lindsey Graham should be ashamed of himself. He said, oh, these are just words. I care more about actions. And words matter. And I think the way to set that example is to have your words be ones that inspire people and that reward people for making a sacrifice. Every time I see someone in uniform, whether it's a police officer or a firefighter, EMT, member of our military, I always say to them, thank you for your service. Always. Because I want them to understand that there are people in this country every day who admire them just for getting up every morning and putting that uniform on and be willing to do something that's bigger than just themselves. So I think that's the only way to do it. I don't think there's any magic. I just think it's remembering every day what you're here for, why you're doing this. And so I think it's really important. And I try to start with my own children. We're lucky. We have 4 great kids between 20 and 30. So they're grown up now. And I tell them there's only 2 things that you can absolutely control in your life every day: how hard you work and how you treat other people. The rest of your life is a roller coaster ride that's controlled often by other people and other events. But the 2 things that you can control every day is how hard you work and how you treat other people. And we need to get back to that ethic in this country, that everybody has an obligation to work hard and everybody has an obligation to treat others with respect. And dare I say, kindness. That might be aspiring too much at the moment, but let's start with respect. I think if we do those things, we're going to get back on the right track in this country. And that's the kind of example I will set as president. I can guarantee you that. So let me end with this. First of all, thank you all for coming here tonight, for staying here, for your questions. They're really good ones, and I appreciate it. And I'll end where I started. This is a fight for the soul of this country. This is a fight not just for the soul of my party. This is a fight for the soul of the country. Who do we want to be? How do we want to be represented? What do we want to have coming out of the mouth of the person that we call the President of the United States? And it's not just, will they be kind? Will they be respectful? Will they answer my questions? You have an obligation as a public official to answer the questions of the people who gave you the power in the first place. Will you be honest, even if you think it might not be popular? Will you disagree when you need to disagree, but do it in a respectful way? Will you fight for the things that matter and not just for your own self-interest? I will tell you that Donald Trump could not answer honestly yes to any of those things. And you don't have to take my word for it. You've seen it. You've seen it. And that's not the kind of country I want us to be. It's certainly not the kind of party I want us to be. And you got to be willing to fight for it. You can't just go out there and hope it's going to fix itself. You can't just go out there and give mealy-mouthed answers to important questions. You can't be everything to everybody. The people who try to do that wind up being forced to lie and don't get anything done. That's what the choices are in this race now. That's it. And so you have a chance to change history on January 23rd. And everybody in New Hampshire who's eligible to vote should. And I hope you vote for me, and I'm asking for your vote. But even if you're not going to vote for me, go out and vote anyway. We need to have the citizens' voices heard loudly. I'll end with this. I had a woman grab me by the arm going through a restaurant in Nashua as I was walking out of the restaurant. And she said to me, keep going after Trump. You got to get him. And I said, absolutely, but why are you whispering? I said, well, some of my friends don't like when I say that. Let me tell you what I've learned about New Hampshire. This is a state I've spent the most time in, other than my own state, over the last 8 years. New Hampshire doesn't whisper. New Hampshire isn't shy. New Hampshire speaks loudly. And that's what I want you to do on January 23rd. Speak loudly. And in great numbers is a great voice. And I hope to earn as many of those voices as I can. And if I do, I promise you that I will give you a campaign and a presidency that you can be proud to be associated with and to have voted for. So thanks for coming tonight. I appreciate it.